Sarah Martinez had dreamed of visiting London her entire life. At 28, she finally saved enough money from her teaching job in California to make the trip happen. She packed her bags with excitement, her phone filled with a careful list of all the places she wanted to see. Buckingham Palace was at the top of that list. The morning sun painted the palace gates in golden light as Sarah approached with her camera ready. Tourists from around the world gathered behind the metal barriers, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous King's Guard. Sarah had read about these soldiers online, how they stood perfectly still for hours, never breaking character, never responding to anything around them. She found a good spot near the front of the crowd, pulled out her phone to take pictures. The guard stood like a statue in his bright red uniform and tall black hat. His face showed no emotion, his eyes stared straight ahead. Sarah was amazed by his discipline. "This is incredible," she whispered to herself, snapping photo after photo. She wanted to capture every detail of this moment to share with her students back home. They would love to hear about her adventure. As more tourists arrived, the crowd began to push and squeeze together. Sarah felt someone bump into her from behind. She stumbled forward slightly, trying to keep her balance while holding her phone high above the crowd to get a better shot. "Excuse me?" she said politely to the person who had bumped her, but they had already moved away into the thick crowd. Sarah shook her head and focused back on taking pictures. The King's Guard remained perfectly still. Even as hundreds of people pointed cameras at him and chattered in dozens of different languages, Sarah was impressed by his focus. She couldn't imagine standing so still for so long with all this noise and activity around her. She decided to move to a different angle to get a side view of the guard. As she walked along the barrier, she noticed how the morning light created interesting shadows on the palace walls. This would make a perfect background for her photos. Sarah raised her phone again, but this time something felt different. The phone felt lighter in her hand. She looked down and gasped. The back of her phone case was gone, and with it, the small pocket where she kept important items during her travels. Her heart began to race as she realized what had happened. Inside that pocket was a small piece of paper with her hotel address and her emergency contact information. More importantly, it contained the phone number of James, a kind British man she had met at the airport yesterday. James worked as a tour guide in London and had offered to show her around the city during her week-long visit. He seemed genuine and friendly, and Sarah had been looking forward to calling him later that day. Somewhere on the ground, near one of the most famous landmarks in the world, Sarah began to panic. She looked down at the concrete around her feet but saw only other tourist shoes and dropped candy wrappers. The small white paper could be anywhere in this crowd of hundreds of people. She got down on her hands and knees, trying to search between people's feet. Other tourists looked at her strangely, but she didn't care. She had to find that number. James had been so kind to her, and she didn't want him to think she wasn't interested in his offer to show her around London. "Have you seen a small piece of paper?" They all shook their heads and continued taking their photos. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Could she be so careless on her first day in London? As she searched desperately on the ground, she didn't notice that her frantic movements had caught the attention of someone very unexpected. The King's Guard, who was supposed to ignore everything around him, had seen the distressed tourist crawling near his post, for the first time in his 2-hour shift. The guard's eyes moved slightly downward to watch the young woman searching frantically on the ground below him. The King's Guard's name was Thomas Wilson, and he had been protecting the royal family for 3 years. In all that time, he had never broken protocol. He had stood through rain, snow, and blazing summer heat without moving a muscle. Tourist! Had tried everything to make him react: funny faces, loud noises, even waving money in front of his face. Nothing had ever worked, but something about this young woman's genuine distress touched him. Thomas could see she wasn't trying to get attention or make him break character for a photo. She was truly upset about something she had lost, and her search was becoming more desperate by the minute. Through his peripheral vision, Thomas watched Sarah crawl further away from his post, searching under benches and around trash bins. Tourists were starting to film her, probably thinking it was funny. This made Thomas feel uncomfortable. The woman clearly needed help, but he couldn't leave his position or speak while on duty. Then Thomas saw something that made his heart skip. About 6 feet to his left, caught under the edge of a small decorative barrier, was a white piece of paper. The wind had blown it there, and it was now trapped, but visible. From his elevated position, Thomas could see it clearly, but Sarah was looking in completely the wrong direction. Sarah had moved about 20 feet away, now searching near a group of street performers. She looked exhausted and defeated. Thomas watched as she sat down on a bench and put her head in her hands. He could see her shoulders shaking slightly, and he realized she might be crying. This was the moment Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He had never broken protocol before, but he had also never seen someone in such genuine need of help. Very slowly, and in a way that most tourists wouldn't notice, Thomas moved his eyes to look directly at the piece of paper. Then he looked at Sarah, then back at the paper. A young boy standing near the barrier noticed the guard's subtle eye movements. The boy tugged on his mother's sleeve and pointed, "Mummy, look, the guard is looking at something." The mother followed her son's pointing finger and saw the piece of paper. She was a smart woman and quickly understood what might be happening. She had seen the distressed tourists searching earlier and put two and two together. "Excuse me," the mother called out to Sarah, who was still sitting on the bench looking defeated. "Are you looking for a piece of paper?" Sarah's head shot up immediately. "Yes. Do you know where it is?" The mother pointed toward the decorative barrier near Thomas's post. "There's a white paper stuck over there. The guard seems to be looking at it." Sarah jumped up from the bench and ran back toward the guard's position. Sure enough, there was her precious piece of paper, trapped but safe under the barrier's edge. She carefully pulled it out and unfolded it. James's phone number was still clearly written in her neat handwriting. Relief flooded through Sarah's entire body. She pressed the paper to her chest and looked up at the king's guard. Thomas had returned his gaze to straight ahead. But Sarah was certain she saw the tiniest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing he couldn't respond but hoping he could hear her. What Sarah didn't know was that several other tourists had witnessed the entire interaction. They had seen the guard's subtle movements and realized he had helped guide them to the lost paper. Word began to spread quickly through the crowd about what had just happened. People started taking pictures not just of the guard, but of Sarah holding her recovered paper. Some began posting on social media about the kind king's guard who helped a tourist without breaking the rules. The story was starting to take on a life of its own. As Sarah carefully tucked the paper back into a secure pocket, she noticed that more and more people were looking at her and the guard. She felt a bit embarrassed by all the attention, but also grateful beyond words. This small act of kindness had saved her entire London vacation. Within an hour, the story of Thomas and Sarah had spread far beyond the palace gates. A teenager in the crowd had filmed the moment when the mother pointed Sarah toward the paper. She posted it on social media with the caption, "King's Guard secretly helps lost tourists find her phone number." The video went viral almost immediately. Sarah had no idea about the online attention. She walked to a nearby cafe to call James. Her hands were still shaking slightly from the stress of almost losing his number. When James answered on the second ring, his cheerful British accent immediately calmed her nerves. "Sarah, I was hoping you'd call today. How are you enjoying London so far?" Sarah told him about her morning adventure, including how a King's Guard had somehow helped her find the lost paper with his number on it. James listened with amazement. "That's absolutely extraordinary," James said. "Those guards are trained never to break character. You must have really impressed him with your genuine need for help. Would you like me to come meet you?" "Love to hear more about this story." Meanwhile, back at the palace, Thomas was finishing his tour shift. Replacement arrived exactly on time, and Thomas was finally able to move from his position. Yes. As he walked toward the guardhouse, several tourists called out to him. "Thank you for helping that lady. You're a hero. That was so kind of you." Thomas was confused. He had helped the tourist find her paper, but he thought he had been subtle about it. He had no idea that his small act of kindness had been noticed by so many people. When Thomas reached the guardhouse, his commanding officer, Captain Roberts, was waiting for him with a serious expression. Thomas's heart sank. Had he gotten in trouble for moving his eyes while on duty? "Wilson," Captain Roberts said formally, "we need to talk." Thomas stood at attention, preparing for the worst. "Yes, sir. It seems you've become quite famous," the captain said, turning his computer screen toward Thomas. The viral video was playing, showing the moment when the mother helped Sarah find her paper near Thomas's post. Thomas watched in amazement. As the video showed his subtle eye movements and the happy ending when Sarah recovered her lost item, the video already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments praising his kindness and professionalism. "Sir, I can explain," Thomas began, but Captain Roberts held up his hand. "At ease, Wilson. You're not in trouble. In fact, quite the opposite. The royal family's social media team has been monitoring this story all morning. They're impressed with how you handled the situation. You showed compassion while maintaining your duty and dignity." Thomas couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had expected punishment, not praise. Captain Roberts continued, "The palace has decided to use this as a positive example of how the King's Guard can serve the public while maintaining our traditions. They want to interview you for a special feature about the human side of royal duty." Outside the palace walls, Sarah was having lunch with James at a cozy pub near Westminster. James was fascinated by her story and kept asking for more details about the guard's behavior. "You realize you've probably made that soldier's day?" James told her. "Those guards see thousands of tourists every week, but they rarely get to actually help someone in a meaningful way. He probably joined the King's Guard because he wanted to serve people, and you gave him a chance to do exactly that." Sarah hadn't thought about it from the guard's perspective. She had been so focused on her own relief at finding the paper that she hadn't considered how good it might have felt for him to help someone. "I wish I could thank him properly," Sarah said. "He saved my entire vacation. Without that number, I would have spent my week in London completely alone." James smiled. "Well, maybe there's a way we can make that happen. I have some connections in the city. Let me make a few phone calls after lunch." The next morning, Sarah woke up in her hotel room to find 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages. Her phone had been buzzing all night, but she had turned off the sound to sleep better after her jet lag. When she saw all the notifications, she thought something terrible had happened back home. She quickly called her sister Emma in California. Emma answered immediately, practically shouting with excitement. "Sarah, you're famous. You're all over the internet." "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, still confused and half asleep. "It's a story about you and the King's Guard. Someone filmed it, and it's everywhere. Mom saw it on the morning news, and Dad's friends are sharing it on Facebook. The video has 2 million views already." Sarah sat down heavily on her hotel bed. She remembered the teenager with the phone yesterday, but she never imagined it would become such a big story. Emma sent her links to news articles with headlines like "Tourist Lost Phone Number Leads" to "Heartwarming Moment with King's Guard" and "The Guard Who Broke Protocol to Help a Stranger." Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, Thomas was dealing with his own version of unexpected fame. The royal communications team had scheduled his interview for that afternoon, and media requests were pouring in from around the world. Everyone wanted to know more about the guard who had shown such kindness while maintaining his duty. Thomas felt nervous about all the attention. He was a private person who had joined the King's Guard to serve quietly and professionally. He never wanted to be in the spotlight. "Don't worry," Captain Roberts told him during their morning briefing. "The palace communications team knows how to handle these situations. They'll make sure the focus stays on the positive message about service and duty, not on you personally." At the same time, James was making good on his promise to help Sarah. Thank the guard. His friend Marcus worked in event planning and had connections with the palace's public relations department. James explained Sarah's situation and asked if there might be a way for her to properly thank Thomas. "Actually," Marcus said, "the timing is perfect. The palace wants to do a follow-up story about both the guard and the tourist. They think it would show the human connection between the royal family's service and the people they protect. Would your friend be interested in participating?" James immediately called Sarah with the news. She was sitting in a coffee shop near her hotel, still processing her sudden internet fame, when her phone rang. "Sarah, you won't believe this," James said excitedly. "The palace wants to arrange a proper meeting between you and the guard. Want to film it as a follow-up to the viral video? Sarah's first instinct was to say no. She wasn't comfortable being on camera, and she worried about making the situation bigger than it needed to be. But then she thought about the guard, Thomas. She had learned his name from the news articles. He had helped her when he didn't have to, and she really did want to thank him properly. Will he be comfortable with that? She asked James. I don't want to cause problems for him. According to my contact, he's agreed to it, the palace thinks. It's a good way to show the human side of royal service. Plus, it gives both of you a chance to meet properly, away from all the crowds and chaos. After thinking it over for the rest of the morning, Sarah decided to agree. She called James back and told him she would participate in the palace's follow-up story. That afternoon, she received an official call from the Royal Communications Office. A polite woman named Victoria explained that they would arrange a private meeting between Sarah and Thomas in one of the palace's smaller reception rooms. It'd be filmed for a short documentary about kindness and service. But both Sarah and Thomas would have final approval over what was shown to the public. Want this to feel natural and genuine, Victoria explained. This isn't about publicity for us. It's about celebrating the kind of human connection that makes the royal family's mission meaningful. Sarah agreed to meet at the palace the following day. As she hung up the phone, she realized her simple vacation to London had turned into something completely unexpected. She just hoped she could find the right words to thank the man who had helped her when she needed it most. The next day, Sarah stood outside a side entrance to Buckingham Palace, wearing her best dress and feeling more nervous than she had ever felt in her life. Victoria from the Royal Communications Office met her at the entrance with a warm smile. Please. Don't worry, Victoria said, noticing Sarah's nervous expression. Thomas is just as nervous as you are. He's a lovely young man, very down to earth. This will be much more casual than you might expect. As they walked through the elegant hallways of the palace, Sarah couldn't believe she was actually inside one of the most famous buildings in the world. The walls were covered with beautiful paintings, and everything seemed to sparkle in the soft lighting. They entered a comfortable sitting room with large windows overlooking the palace gardens. The room was decorated simply but elegantly. Two comfortable chairs facing each other and a small table with tea and biscuits prepared. A few minutes later, Thomas entered the room, and Sarah was surprised by how different he looked out of uniform. He was tall and had kind brown eyes, and he seemed much younger than she had expected. He was wearing a simple navy sweater and looked just as nervous as she felt. Hello, Thomas said quietly, extending his hand. I'm Thomas. It's nice to meet you properly. I'm Sarah, she replied, shaking his hand. Thank you so much for what you did yesterday. You saved my entire vacation. They sat down in the chairs, and Victoria explained that the cameras would start rolling in a few minutes. But first, she wanted them to get comfortable talking to each other. Thomas, why don't you tell Sarah a bit about yourself? Victoria suggested. Thomas smiled shyly. Well, I'm from a small town called Dorking, about an hour from London. I joined the King's Guard because my grandfather served in the military, and I wanted to continue that tradition of service. I've been doing this job for 3 years now, and yesterday was actually the first time I ever helped someone while on duty. Sarah was surprised to learn that her situation had been unique for Thomas too. Really? You've never helped anyone before? Not like that, Thomas explained. Trained to ignore distractions and maintain our position no matter what happens around us. But when I saw how upset you were, I just couldn't help myself. You weren't trying to get attention or make me break character. You genuinely needed help, and I could see exactly where your paper had blown. Victoria signaled that the cameras were now recording. But she had done such a good job making them comfortable that neither Sarah nor Thomas felt tense about it. Now, what made you decide to help me? Sarah asked Thomas, genuinely curious. Thomas thought for a moment before answering. My job is to protect and serve the royal family, but they represent the people of Britain and the Commonwealth. In a way, helping you was part of serving them. Plus, my grandmother always taught me that small acts of kindness matter more than grand gestures. Sarah felt her eyes filling with tears, but this time they were happy tears. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. What you did was exactly the kind of small kindness that restored my faith in people. I was so far from home and feeling overwhelmed, and you made me feel cared for without saying a single word." Thomas looked genuinely moved by her words. "I'm just glad you found what you were looking for. Was it something important?" Sarah laughed, feeling much more relaxed now. "It was a phone number. A very important phone number, actually." She looked toward where James was sitting just outside the camera frame, watching the interview. "It belonged to someone who has become a very good friend during my visit to London." Thomas followed her gaze and saw James, who waved politely. "Ah, I see. Well, I'm very glad my small help led to something good for you." Victoria asked them a few more questions about duty, kindness, and human connection. Both Sarah and Thomas spoke naturally and honestly about their experience. The interview felt more like a conversation between friends than a formal media event. As the camera stopped rolling, Victoria smiled at both of them. "That was perfect. You both came across as genuine and kind. The palace will be very pleased with this," but the biggest surprise was still to come. As they prepared to leave, Victoria handed Sarah an envelope with the royal seal on it. Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten note on official royal letterhead. The message was short, but incredibly meaningful. "Dear Miss Martinez, we have heard about the kindness shown to you by one of our king's guards and your gracious response to his help. This exemplifies the best of human nature and the spirit of service we hope to represent. As a small token of our appreciation for bringing this positive story to light, we would like to invite you to attend the changing of the guard ceremony. Tomorrow, as our special guest, you will have a reserved viewing area and the opportunity to meet some of our other service members. Thank you for reminding us why we serve." The royal household. Sarah read the note 3 times before she could believe it was real. Thomas, who had received a similar invitation, was equally amazed. "This is incredible," Sarah said. "I came to London hoping to see the palace from the outside, and now I'm being invited to a private ceremony." Thomas nodded, still processing everything that had happened in the past 2 days. "I never imagined that following my instincts to help someone would lead to all this. Usually, we're taught that maintaining discipline is the highest virtue. But this has shown me that sometimes compassion is even more important." The next day, Sarah arrived at the palace for the ceremony. She was escorted to a special viewing area where she had an unobstructed view of the famous ritual. James accompanied her, and they watched in awe as the guards performed their precise movements with military precision. When the ceremony ended, Sarah was invited to meet the guards, informally. She discovered that Thomas's small act of kindness had inspired discussions throughout the regiment about the balance between duty and human compassion. "What Thomas did reminded all of us why we're really here," explained Sergeant Major Davies, who'd been with the King's Guard for 15 years. "We're not just statues for tourists to photograph. We're human beings serving something greater than ourselves. And sometimes that service means showing kindness when it's needed most." Thomas approached Sarah as she was preparing to leave. "Wanted to give you something," he said, handing her a small package. Inside was a replica of the King's Guard badge and a personal note from Thomas, thanking her for helping him remember why he loved his job. "You gave me something too, Thomas. Said you reminded me that our job isn't just about following rules perfectly. It's about being the kind of people who represent the best values of service and care." Sarah hugged the package to her chest. "This has been the most amazing experience of my life. I came to London as a tourist, but I feel like I'm leaving as someone who understands what true service means." As Sarah and James walked away from the palace, they talked about how one small moment had created ripples that touched so many lives. The viral video had brought joy to millions of people around the world who were hungry for stories about human kindness. 6 months later, Sarah received a letter from Thomas. He had been promoted to corporal and was now helping to train new guards. Part of their training included discussions about when compassion and duty could work together, rather than against each other. Sarah had also made changes in her own life. Inspired by Thomas's example of quiet service, she had started a program at her school where students performed small acts of kindness for others without expecting recognition. She called it the King's Guard Project, and it had spread to other schools across California, The lost phone number that had caused so much panic had led to something beautiful. Sarah and James had become close friends, and James had even visited California to meet Sarah's family. Thomas had found new meaning in his service, and thousands of people around the world had been reminded that small acts of kindness could change everything. Sometimes, the most important moments in life happen when we least expect them. Peace. Of paper blowing in the wind, a guard's subtle glance, and a tourist's grateful heart had created a story that would be remembered long after the viral video was forgotten. It proved that genuine human connection could happen anywhere, even in the most formal and traditional places. When people choose kindness over indifference, the King's Guard still stands at attention outside Buckingham Palace every day, protecting the royal family and representing the best of British service. But now, thanks to Thomas and Sarah's story, everyone who sees them is reminded that behind the formal uniform is a real person with a caring heart, ready to help when it matters. Most